Well, family, with all the sun and the heat we've been having as of late, how many of you managed to be able to capture a little bit of that sun in the form of a tan or in the form of a burn in some way? It's just been incredible this past week, especially the heat and the sun. It's like August at the end of May on that. That's what it's been like on Wednesday. I had to go out. I had to water. all the veggies. I spent 3 hours out there early Wednesday morning to be able to water everything. And the sun was early in the morning. Sun was blazing hot. The humidity was unbearable. And it's so funny because as I was watering everything, there was this toad that kept hopping into the spray as I was, and so I obliged him, and I gave him a good dousing. But he seemed to have enough of the sun on that. And when I went in afterwards and looked at my sorry self in the mirror, I tell you, my skin was no longer the white and pasty self it usually is. I had a well-brimmed tan. It was a farmer's tan because I'm a farmer. But nonetheless, it was a well-worn tan and burnt, even to the point of burning. And I've got proof for it this morning because my skin is peeling and I'm itchy on that. Isn't that a beautiful way to start off on that? But that said, no doubt I've been in the sun. Because you can see its mark. You can see its burn on my face. So I got to ask you the same. Have you been in the sun this past week? Because you can see the tan, the burn on your face. Now, obviously, if you've been here the last few weeks, you know exactly, probably, where I'm going with this illustration. I got to ask you, not only have you spent time this past week in the physical, literal sun, so that it shows red and peeling on your face, but as well, and more importantly, have you spent time in the presence of the one true Son, God's one and only Son. And just like Moses of old, your time with him has left such a mark on you that others can't help but notice, because they see on you the burn of the glory of God. They see on you the wonder of who God is because you've spent time in His presence. Have you spent, and I'm going to ask it, if you have spent time in His presence, it doesn't just mean to sit and do nothing. It means to take the Word and open it. Have you spent time this past week in the sun? Have you spent time this past week in just the S-U-N, but the S-O-N? If so, give me book and chapter where you've been reading. Give me book and chapter where you've been reading. Because this is where it cuts it. Not enough just to take in on a Sunday morning. You've got to daily be able to spend time in the sun so that the mark on your face is seen. By God's grace, I've been going through 2 Chronicles, and I'm into 2 Chronicles 10 through 23. This past week really hit me. King Asa's life. King Asa was a king that started incredibly well off, but at the end was hurt and moved away from God. And I looked at God almost to the point of tears and said, Lord, don't let that happen to me. Let me end the way I began. Don't let me become so distraught by anything in life that I become like King Asa. See, this is the personal thing that happens when you have your time with the Lord. Where? Book and chapter. You don't even have to say what you got out of it. Just tell me book and chapter where you've been reading. Yeah.
Just going through the Psalms. I think I'm at 17 or something.
Yeah, is that right? Yeah. Good. Yeah, be able to. The Psalms are so beautiful on that. Mom.
I'm wandering through the Psalms, but I believe it's chapter 9 in both Isaiah and Williams.
Is that right? Yeah? Well, okay, so you're going through the Psalm, but you do in Isaiah and part of the New Testament as well, too. Yeah, good. Someone else? Nehemiah. Shell's been saying that as she's gone up. That's incredible, that restoration, that God working in their lives. Like
2 Samuel and Acts.
Is that right? 2 Samuel and Acts, yeah. some kingship and started the church.
Maybe you could explain to me why it's called Second Samuel. Samuel's long gone in First Samuel.
Actually, he wasn't. He was just resting.
Yeah, that's good.
John Wayne.
Technically, they say Samuel wrote it, but First and Second Samuel, so that's good. Scott. Book of Timothy. Have you been, Scott, reading?
Yes, some of it, yes.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Anyone else? Leslie?
And Psalms as well, but I just wrote down here, let people see your godly hand.
Let people see your what?
See your godly hand when you said
Yeah.
about getting into...
Well, do you know, and that, what a beautiful segue, because obviously, first of all, I hope and pray all of you have. Do not try to convince people on a Sunday you know Jesus when you haven't spent time with Him. Why? You're a liar. You're a liar. You're a liar. You're a liar. And I think that is so important for us to be able to hear. I get it, there are going to be better weeks than others. So I'm not saying that you're going to have a jubilant time on that. I'm just saying you're setting aside time to be able to get into the Word, to be able to bask in the sun, so that others see. Not only so that you grow, but so that others see the wonder of who the Lord is. Why? Because when you've got a tan, it's funny, I can't see my own tan. I can't see my burn on me unless I look in the mirror. And really, you know, if you saw my pasty white rest of myself, you'd see just how burnt I really am on that. But I can't see it, but others can. Mom.
Are you sure you're not using someone's makeup?
Yeah, no, yeah.
Tanning
Yeah,
oil.
actually, no, that's another sermon series. So no, I mean this is just from being out in the sun. But the fact is, it's not for ourselves. There is a sense, spiritually speaking, as we spend time with Jesus, there's an encouragement in our hearts. But it's so that others can see. Like Leslie was saying, if you remember, that is the first and foundational argument for God's existence. That others see the truth of His reality, of God's reality, and the wonder of who He really is. Subjectively, yes, but nonetheless, subjectively on your faces, in your attitudes, in your actions, in your words. That is so important for us to be able to allow others. Do not think you're going to be a good witness for the Lord if you don't spend time with Him. You won't. You're going to convince yourself you are, because that's so often the way I find we lie to ourselves. But the only way you're going to show... there are times you just know when someone's been with Jesus. You just know it inside. They don't even have to say it. You just know that there's been. That's what I want in my life. There are weeks that are better than others, but by God's grace, I want others to see that Jesus is alive and well in me. Before we start rattling off to others the sure and objective, but somewhat really cold and clinical arguments for God's existence, you don't look at someone at work and say, you know what? Let me give you a point. Point number one, God is alive because... That's not the way it's done. It's got to start from you. The first argument for God's existence is personal experience. It's subjective. Yes, I understand. They'll point, well, that works for you. That's good. But the trouble is, first, that's what's got to be seen. Before, the cold and clinical arguments are important, but it has to start that they want what you have. They see the burn of God's glory on your face and they say, you know what? I want that. I want that. I want that. And the only way that happens is we spend time with Him. But before we give others the technical arguments for God's existence, first we have to make them want what we've got, namely the life-transforming presence of good and almighty God Himself in our lives. Tell me, if people looked at your face, would they know God is alive? I didn't start, you saw me, I didn't start the service off well. And there are times where that's going to happen. And I apologize, forgive me on that. But the fact of the matter is, on a regular basis, are people seeing, do they know God is alive in you? Do they know because they can see Him on your face? And if they do see Him, that He's alive and well in you, then what are they seeing of Him in and through you? I think so important, so important. Only then can we move on to the other arguments of God's existence. But first, let them see that there's an appetite inside of you. How many of you know Jesus is alive and well in you? How many of you know that? And I'm going to get everyone who knows it, raise your hand. If Jesus is alive and well in you, good. Because I get it. Sometimes we're different personalities, and some of you will put your hand up, without me hardly saying any others. You got to almost push your hand up. But periodically, I'm going to say that because do you know that Jesus is alive and well in you? If you do, it's going to show. And that's where it starts. It's subjective, yes, but I think people have got to see the wonder of who Christ is before you move on to the objective arguments. Like 2 weeks ago, the argument from the universal innate sense of God. It doesn't matter where you go in this world, people of all cultures, whether advanced or primitive, there's something inside each of us that just screams that God really is there. A true echo of His existence in our very souls. It's not that people are in touch with God. Understand that. That's not the point of this argument. The argument for God's existence is there's something of God's echo inside each and every one that's out there. You can go to the most advanced civilizations, you can go to the most primitive cultures and see entire religious systems are set up, even apart from being in touch with some culture that knows God. There are religious systems that are being set up. Why? Because there's this innate sense of God in us that is so important. And a lot of times, truth be told, that sense of God inside of us is acted on in improper ways. It doesn't mean that just because there is that sense of God, everyone will turn to Jesus on that. Some do, some don't on that. Many don't. They go into ways that are not proper on that. But there is this innate sense of God in people everywhere. So,
yesterday, while we were doing the garage sale, I probably spoke to 6 people that said, "Oh, I believe in God."
I know. This is this sense, and remember the argument that I made. If explorers went around and they saw hieroglyphics and they saw paintings, ancient paintings of pink elephants, everywhere, in every culture you went into, people seeing pink elephants, people hearing stories of pink elephants, we would be wrong if we didn't stop and say, why are there pink elephants everywhere? Now hear me, there are no pink elephants on that, unless, there are a few crazy people that probably see that, but that's not what it is. There is God. In every culture, there's this idea of God. Where does it come from? Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, God has placed eternity in their hearts. God Himself has placed that echo of who He is inside each and every person. And the only way that it can be silenced is if it's shoved down or repressed. That's why, by the way, it's interesting, as you talk with people in this society, many people will say, I don't believe in God. Why? Because we have repressed Him. And yet, push something inside. Remember what we even said 2 weeks ago. The fact is that sometimes in the midst of the most difficult times, people will suddenly have this sense of God. If you're out there, God, help me. Why? If you're out there, pink elephant, how many have said that? Nobody does. But people point to God. Why? Because there's this sense of God inside. Or sometimes people just get angry. Oh, God, there is no God. Why would you say that if you don't believe there's a God? What? Oh, there's no pink elephants helping me. You know, it sounds stupid. But the fact is, inside each of us, there's this innate sense of God. And it's universal, all over. Why? Because God himself has placed an echo of himself inside of us. And it is so important for us to realize. If you are going to diss God, you first have to tell me how. How come? Why do cultures everywhere believe that there is some sense of God? That makes sense? Argument number 2, that was. Then last week, the third argument, what's technically known as the cosmological argument. Don't go to someone and say, you know what? You know what? Let me tell you, there is a God, and let me give you the cosmological argument. You know, can't even say that with a straight face, but that's what it is, the cosmos. It points to the creation, It's the argument from creation itself, or specifically the argument from causality. The truth that states if something is limited, temporary, not eternal, then it has to be caused by something or someone outside of us. If something is here, and it hasn't been here forever, someone outside of it had to cause it. Does that make sense? You know, if it's a temporary effect, if it is a pew, if it's a building, someone had to have created it on that, if it's not eternal. And seeing, as we came to understand from last week's message, since science itself has unequivocally proven that this universe we live in is itself limited, temporary, not eternal. Simple, rational logic. Not faith. I'm not talking faith here. I'm talking simple, rational logic then dictates that this universe just had to have been caused by something or someone. It's not eternal. It hasn't been here forever. So you have to point outside of this universe to someone. I do care who you think it is, but do not think that this is the way it's always been. Because science itself has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that this universe is temporal. Is not eternal. The second law, remember, the second law of thermodynamics implies just that. The universe is running out of usable energy. It's shutting down. And if something is winding down, it had to have been wound up to begin with. Look in the mirror. I see the gray hair. Not only the red face, I see the gray hair. I'm running down. So are you. Sorry on that. And because I'm running down, it shows this entire universe is running down. And the second law of thermodynamics says just that. We're running out of usable energy. So that means if something is running down, it's not eternal. It hasn't been here forever. And if something hasn't been here forever, it means there's got to be a creator for it. There's got to be a creator for it. And as we saw as well, the Hubble telescope and other data-gathering instruments have as well proven once and for all that this universe is not stable. If something was eternal, think through it, it would be stable, right? It wouldn't, if something was forever there, it would show stability. Trouble is, the universe doesn't show that. At its start, we learn it exploded into being. That's what all these data gathering, this isn't from Scripture. This is from science itself. It exploded at the beginning to be able to form what it is today. And it is expanding. And interesting, if you remember what I said last week, not into space. Space itself, the heavens themselves are expanding. And if you trace it back, which science has done, they can point back to the place where it all began. To me, that is phenomenal. Because it says it hasn't always been here. It has started at one point in time, and it necessitates a creator, necessitates a first cause. Both cosmic radiation and temperature ripples have scientifically proven that to be the case, which resoundingly argues for the legitimacy of the first chapter of our Bibles. In the beginning, God spoke, and bang! this universe exploded and expanded into existence. It's interesting. I never gave you these scriptures. I'm going to give you 3 scriptures here. And all of them say the same thing, but I want you to hear. 9 or 10 times, when God is referring to the heavens, He refers to something interesting, especially in light of science. What I'm saying is there's not a stability in this universe. It's expanding, it's stretching out. What does God say when He talks about the heavens? Isaiah 40, 22. We'll do that. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. Late, Isaiah 40, 22. Job chapter 9, verse 8. Job chapter 9, verse 8. Go ahead. Do you want to? Would you like? Give me your first name again, sir. Mark. Sorry, Mark. Forgive me.
What was that again?
Job chapter 9, verse 8. Job, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it so much. Job chapter 9, verse 8. And finally, Jeremiah 10, 12. Nancy, Jeremiah 10, 12. Listen to this. The Hebrew word for the heavens. 9 or 10 times in Scripture it speaks of this. And to me it was amazing. I never gave you this last week because this past week as I was going through it, again, I looked at it. What an amazing thing this is. Listen to Isaiah 40, 22. Actually, do you know what? Each of you read one after the other. I know, hopefully I won't stop you. But each of you read one after the other. Isaiah 40, 22, Job chapter 9, verse 8, and Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 12. And I want you to tell me how God describes the heavens. Isaiah 40, 22.
He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy, and spreads them out like a tent to live in.
What does God do with the heavens? Stretches them out. Job 9, 8.
He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea.
Speaking of God again, stretching out the heavens. Jeremiah 10, 12.
But God made the earth by His power. He founded the world by His wisdom and stretched out the heavens by His understanding.
Isn't, to me, that blow... I'm sorry, maybe you guys don't get excited about that. To me, that is amazing. It's what science says. The heavens are expanding, are, in other words, stretching out. I have read those comments constantly, never got the full understanding of it. But when you see how it backs up science itself, it's not stable. God didn't just place the heavens there and everything continued to exist. They're expanding. And from the time God said, "Let there be," and bang, everything started. You know, to me, that is so amazing. And do you remember what I said last week? Even Einstein himself was upset with his theory of general relativity. Why? Because Einstein was a pantheist. He believed that the universe was always here. The trouble is, his own theory said that the general relativity theory says that the universe is expanding. It's expanding. How can it expand if it's always been here? So, remember what I said, Einstein puts this cosmic fudge factor into it so that he can keep his idea of an eternal universe on that. Trouble is, 10 years into it, other mathematicians see this and say, this is bogus. And Einstein himself said, the greatest mistake I ever made was to put this cosmic fudge factor, as if the universe was eternal. It's not. And to the point where Einstein was recorded as saying, I would love to see how God himself created this universe. See, that's what I'm talking about. This is so solid. The universe had a beginning. The universe had a beginning, and it's in the person. We believe in the person of who God is. You're going to have to wrestle with that. But you cannot say it's eternal. And even, great, quote-unquote, great men who speak that out, they will do it on the case of the first law of thermodynamics that say energy can't be created or destroyed. But within a closed atmosphere, it's there. It can't be recreated or made more, so I get that. But you can't say it's always been. It doesn't speak of eternal energy, even in the first law. But the second law categorically says because the universe is losing usable energy, it's wearing down, and it forces you to conclude that it had to have had a start, this universe. See, that's what atheists have got to deal with, but they don't want to. That's the problem, you know. However, that said, before going to communion this morning, let me give you a fourth argument for God's existence, which actually flows beautifully from the third argument, the argument from causality. Number one, the argument for God's existence from personal experience. So important. It's got to start with you. People have got to see God is worth having. And the only way is through your face, your sunburned face. Number two, the argument for God's existence from the universal innate sense of God. Everyone, for some reason, has this idea of God. Not of pink elephants, but of God. Everyone has this idea of God. Number three, the argument for God's existence from causality. Anything finite and temporal has to have a greater cause outside of itself. This pew is temporal. It's not eternal. It will wear away one day, so that means it had to have had a cause. That's the argument from causality, or the cosmological argument. And number four, in keeping with number three, the argument from design. The argument from design, or what's technically known, ready, here's the word, say it with me, teleological argument. Say it, teleological argument, teleological argument. That's what it calls. And this argument is stated this way: the order and design in a system implies that in that system there is purpose. There is purpose in the creation of what happened. The universe has order and design. So it points back to, it couldn't have just happened. It couldn't have just by accident sprung into being. The design points back to an intelligent creator. It points back. It has to. It couldn't have happened just by accident. Why? Because there's design in it. And given the fact we've gone into my vegetable garden as illustration for all the preceding arguments, I want to do the same for you for this one. Understand, as you take a casual stroll through my vegetable garden, not only will you be amazed, you know, I laughed because last week I was almost too much puffing myself up. I don't mean to on that, because I still want God's blessing over my garden. You know, I do know every time I walk through it, it's God that's giving the growth on that. So I want to preface it by saying that. But as you go through my vegetable garden, you are going to note, if you look close enough, that there are some unique, almost bizarre truths or traits, things in my garden that's unique or bizarre on that. For example, my garden is not floor level. It's raised 2 feet up off the ground, 2 feet worth of soil. As you walk through, you literally have to walk through the garden, because there's 2 feet worth of soil on which I plant. If I keep growing it, I'm going to need a step ladder next year to be able to get on top of the garden. Raised beds. Raised beds is a unique, bizarre kind of thing. Bizarre trait number 2. If you look closer at my tomato plants, you'll notice, especially if you saw me planting them, what I do is a very strange thing. I dig down like 8, 9, 10 inches in the soil, and before I plant the tomato transplant, I rip all the leaves off the stem except for the top 5 or 6 inches. And then I take that transplant and I plant it deep, not at the same level that it came out of that transplant box. I put it deep so that there's only 4 or 5 inches jutting out of the surface, on top, you know what I'm saying, on that. Bizarre trait number 2. Bizarre trait number 3. If you take a look, all of my transplants are planted. When I plant them, I put them in, and then I form a moat, a circular moat around them, a hedge of soil, 2 or 3 inches. And in the middle is this transplant. And you see that on most all of my transplants. They're there. It's there on that. You can see this moat that goes around, and in the middle is this transplant, whether it be tomatoes or peppers or broccoli or cauliflower, whatever. It's there. Bizarre trait number 4, though. If you take a look at the celery, I've even done a crazy thing with the celery. For some reason, as you're walking through the garden, what you'll see is the celery is at the bottom of this valley. I've actually transplanted the celery at the bottom of a valley. On either side of the celery transplants are hills. And the celery is in the bottom of these, in the valley bottom on that. Bizarre trait number 4. Bizarre trait number 5. If you watch me water, this time you're going to have to watch me water. If you watch me water my squash and zucchini plants, you'll notice a peculiar thing. First of all, I have them planted in groups of 3 on 2 foot wide hills like this. Groups of 3 here, group of 3 here, group of 3 here. Plant them on that, and I plant them on these hills. And then as I water them, what I do is I water underneath the leaves. Peculiar trait number 4. Why water underneath the leaves? I'll give you one more. For the going. Peculiar trait, I'll give you one more. Number 6, and this is the first time I've actually tried that. If you take a look at my carrot patch, you'll notice in the first 2 or 3 inches, there are wood chips in it. What I did this past week is I burned 2 bags of wood, took the ashes out of that, and spread them in the top 2 or 3 inches of the carrot patch. Bizarre. It's almost like Twilight Zone. As you go through, you see all these things that are showing. Why all these peculiar traits? Without wanting to sound too smug or proud, seeing I did that last week. But all pride aside, to be honest, those bizarre truths of this vegetable garden in my backyard are evidence that whatever or whoever put together my garden is not the airhead that you might think he is. It's someone who knows something about vegetables. Why? There's design in it. There is design in it. It's not just tomato plants thrown into the garden and growing. Will they grow? Ask Leslie. You betcha. They grow in the middle of her driveway on that. She says that so often seeds just grow up in the middle of her drive. With regards to mine, it's not just seeds thrown into the. And I don't mean to make light of Leslie. By the way, I planted all your sunflowers, and they are growing on that. But with regards to my main vegetable patch, they are not just thrown there. There is design worked into that. And that shows that the grand cause of this garden, whoever or whatever it is, has got to be acting in wisdom, in some intelligence, because you see it. You see it in front of you, especially when you see the finished product on that. In short defense of these bizarre traits in my garden, let me say just that. Each of these strange facts I gave you, interestingly, actually contribute to the viability of growing those vegetables. It's not just stupid things on that you see in my garden. You might think that if you don't understand vegetable growing, but the reason I do those things is because it contributes to the viability of growing those vegetables. The raised beds allow, as most of you would know this one already, Joanne's got a beautiful raised beds with regards to vegetable gardening. The raised beds allow for rich, loose, well-draining soil so that the vegetables' roots can get the water and the nutrients they need without being swamped. Oftentimes you put it at ground level and you get a big rain and the vegetables get swamped with water. Put it in raised beds and the water drains to be able to give it what it needs. The deep planting of the tomatoes. Interesting, the way God has made this. If you strip the bottom leaves off, the bottom 2/3, some even say lay the tomato plant on its side and plant it like that and just make sure the top 2 inches are sticking out. I do it deep because I've got raised beds. But what happens when you pull the leaves off and plant it deep is roots grow along the stem. So that not only is that tomato plant anchored well, but that it takes up so much more nutrients and water as it grows. With regards to the circles that I do around, it's to be able to catch as much of the rain as possible on that. I find when I am watering, because I've got these mounded circles, these moated circles, the water gets absorbed in the roots. Recognize, when you water vegetables, you're not watering the leaves for the most part. I get it, there are some that you might, but you're watering the roots. And so as I water it, as I put that moat around each transplant, the water gets to the roots, especially because I've got raised beds, and they can dry out rather quickly. With regards to the furrows on the celery is a water-loving plant. It has to have water. Every day this past week, I took the water out and I watered all. I've got about 15. I don't even really care for celery, to be blunt honest, but put it with peanut butter or Cheese Whiz, and oh, it's good. Yeah, it's good. But you've never, if you don't like celery, you've never tasted one right out of the garden. It is like eating water. Literally, you pull it off, and it is so drenched as you take a bite out of that celery. Why? Because most of celery is made up of water. That is why I plant it in a valley, so that when I water it, it takes up a lot of that water. With regards to the, with regards to the watering under the leaves, it's interesting. For sure, you don't do that with most vegetables, but with regards to the zucchini, you do that because wet leaves can contribute to bacteria on the plant, and I've seen this firsthand, where my entire zucchini plant is shriveled up and died because I haven't watered it properly. Watering under the leaves for the roots, not the leaves, allows no bacterial wilt to be able to happen on these leaves. And with regards to the wood ash and the carrots, it's interesting. This is the first time I've ever. So this is still in the works, whether or not it's going to actually work. But supposedly you put wood ash in with the carrots and it makes them sweeter. It makes the carrots actually. You have to be careful that you don't do a lot, because wood ash brings up the alkalinity of the soil as well. But it supposedly makes them sweeter, and I'll get back to you on that in a few months, whether that's the case or not. But all that to say, not only does the existence of a finite garden argue once and for all that there is a creator of it. The truth is, you walk into my garden, and like I was saying last week, that's not the way when I get up in the spring the garden looks. Sorry, people often say with regards to my photographs, I wished I had a camera like you do. People say that, legit, I wish I had a camera like you do. The issue is the work that's gone into making those photographs. The work that's gone into making the vegetable garden what it is. It says that there is a cause that has brought about that effect. That's the cosmological argument, the argument from causality. But even with regards to this idea of design, it screams. When you look at the garden and see that there is design in it, it screams this couldn't have just happened. This couldn't have just one day you wake up and this is what? Why? It shows there's design behind it. So for someone to say this all happened over billions of... Oh, no, I'm getting onto the universe, right? For someone to say, even walking into our backyard, and say, amazing, this all happened on itself, you know, besides me hauling off and wanting to hit you for that, because there's a lot of work and a lot of design that way. You show yourself less than smart. If you would look at design and say, it just happened, it just happened. And the same thing goes with the universe. If I can say that about my vegetable garden, tell me, can the same thing be said about the universe around us? Can any noticeable intelligence, any order and useful arrangement be seen in the way things have been made or put together? Do you see any order or intelligence in what's been made? Is there any notable design or order such that we're pushed to, even forced to conclude that what's out there, including us, because we're part of the created order, just could not possibly have happened by accident, by mere chance, by dumb luck, by evolution? It couldn't have just happened on that. Design implies a designer. An intelligent design implies an intelligent designer who created with wisdom, with intention, with purpose. I said you can easily see that in my garden. Can you see the design in creation around you? If you can see design in creation around you, then it is argument that says this couldn't have just happened. I don't care how many degrees behind someone's name. I'll look at them and call them a fool to say that all of this could have just happened if I see the design. Is there design? Is there design in the universe? I want to, before we go, and I'm going to give you a couple scriptures before we go to communion on that. Listen. I've pulled them again out of 101 Reasons You Can Believe. An incredible book. You want a shot in the arm on this. You want to talk about design in the universe around us. Read this book, 101 Reasons You Can Believe by Ralph O. Muncaster. And if you want to take a look at it, you can. But, for example, number 76, Pacific anchovies. Like thousands of shiny silver ornaments, they travel quickly through the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Suddenly, without warning, as if on cue, they dart all at once to their left. Moments later, as if orchestrated, they dart back to their right. Thousands upon thousands, all at precisely the same second. How did these tiny Pacific anchovies come to be? How can they possibly know how to dart to and fro at precisely the same time? Who designed such finely tuned precision controls that work so flawlessly? Just in that, just in those anchovies, you see design. Number 15, ice floats. Water, H2O, is more special than most people think. We know it's necessary for all life, but if water didn't behave in a unique way, much of life, certainly human life, wouldn't exist. Consider that almost all substances, as they get colder, or consider that almost all substances contract as they get colder. Water, however, expands and eventually freezes, causing it to float. If ice contracted and sank, like most other substances, the polar ice caps would sink. Water would cover most of the livable dry land. Some years would be worse than others, and most of land life as we know it today would cease to exist. Aquatic life would be drastically affected as well, as sinking ice would churn up deep waters, including the life there, and alter normal ocean currents, forcing marine life into an untenable environment. This seemingly minor, yet unusual aspect of water, that it floats when it freezes, is evidence of divine engineering that is actually necessary for life. Number 88. We'll read a couple more. Earth, the only perfect place for life. In recent years, scientists have started listing the various parameters necessary to support life on planet Earth. In addition, they've estimated the likelihood of finding such life-specific factors on another planet. The results were surprising, and the number of parameters discovered has rapidly increased. Now more than 150 life-specific requirements have been defined. 150 reasons why life began on this planet. There's 150 of them. Some parameters are obvious, such as the distance from the Earth to the Sun. We know that if the Earth were closer, our environment would be too hot. If further away, it would be too cold. Scientists estimate that the probability that another planet would fall within the acceptable range of distance from its star, in our case the Sun, is about 1 chance in 1,000. That's doable, but so there could be other planets out there, except other life support factors are not so obvious, such as the size of the star's galaxy, the age of the star, the planet's number of moons, the tilt of the axis of the planet, the thickness of the planet's crust, the amount of cobalt in the crust, the list goes on. The probability of all these necessary requirement items existing in a planet, hear this, is 1 chance in 10 to the 166th, meaning 166 zeros behind the 1, you got 1 chance to pick the right one. However, scientists estimate that the maximum number of planets in the universe is only 10 to the 22, meaning 10 with 22 zeros behind. That's how many planets in our universe. Taking the number of planets and dividing it by the odds provides the odds that any one planet in the universe would have all the necessary life support parameters. The odds are only 1 chance in 10 to 144. 144 zeros behind it. This is virtually zero. The evidence suggests that the Earth is the only planet where life exists, and that it was planned by a master designer. Two more, and then I'll show you here. Electron, proton, mass ratio, perfect for life. 36, number 36 in that book. Hardly anyone thinks of the ratio of the mass of protons and electrons in atoms, except for theoretical physicists. Yet this ratio is one of the most fundamental and important ratios in all existence. Physicists indicate that a proton is 1,836 times more massive than an electron. I know, this is deep, I get that. But a proton is 1,836 times more massive than an electron. If this ratio varied only slightly, the required molecules for life would not form. There would be no chemistry and no life at all. Did this precise ratio of atomic particles come about by accident? After all, it could have been any number at all. It is so amazing that even an agnostic physicist, the esteemed Newton's chair, Professor Stephen Hawking, who just died, believes it is almost beyond coincidence. He notes, and he said these words, "The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make the development of life possible." How did such a fundamental ratio of atoms become so finely adjusted? Is there design? You forget the little moat around the transplant. I mean, that shows design. But this goes beyond. I give you one more, and it points at us. And with this, I want to give you 2 scriptures. Every cell in the body of a human being contains DNA molecules that contain the information to A, define the individual, and B, direct its functions. DNA is a double helix shape, like a twisted ladder. Each rung of the ladder is called a base pair, made up of chemicals that influence characteristics. Several base pairs are grouped together into genes, and genes are strung together into sequences. All of this defines the makeup and functions of the person. A single human DNA molecule has 3.2 billion base pairs. Hence, it encodes an enormous amount of information. How vast is the information encoded in the DNA of a single human being? If all of one person's DNA were unraveled and placed end to end, it would stretch from the center of the Earth to beyond the edge of the solar system. The vast complexity of 3.2 billion base pairs of information and their organization into individual characteristics is far beyond human design, even human imagination. It's evidence of design by God Himself. See, to me, it's so amazing that we can blindly swallow what's coming to us on the boob tube. I can't understand it. How anyone with any sanity can be able to say it. There is design in the universe. It could not have just happened. Couldn't have just happened. I agree with Leslie. I can take seeds, throw it on my drive, and there will be a few that will come up. Leslie's got a ton of them that are coming up. And maybe that doesn't imply a designer of that garden. But when you see design, when you see tomatoes planted deep, when you see raised beds, when you see celery chosen to act differently than the others because I'm putting it in, you see design. And that couldn't have just happened by chance. It had to have had a designer. And the same thing with regards to the universe. And how many billions times over. And yet, we would be quicker to laugh at the person that walked into my backyard and said, and said when someone said to him that, that just happened, just like that. Person would laugh. But yet when we say the same thing about God, we consider it as deep and proper on that. Do not ever make the mistake. There is a God. You got to find out which God it is. We are not alone in this universe. And as far as I'm concerned, the Bible does a great, great job of being able to speak. I'm going to give you two verses on that. Proverbs 3, 19 and 20. We will look up, and then we'll go to the. You know what, guys? I've got to give you three. I just have to. And I've got it there. I've got five. Okay, so I'm not giving you all five. Proverbs 3, 19 and 20. Who will do that? And we'll go to the table then. Go ahead, Mark. Proverbs 3, 19 and 20. Psalm 104, verse 24. Psalm 104, verse 24. Nance. And finally, Romans 11, 33 to 36. Romans 11, 33 to 36 late. Listen to these that speak. All throughout Scripture we talk about a God, a creator of wisdom on this. And that's what these verses speak. I could have gotten you to look up Genesis 1:1. It says what happens. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, is there wisdom? Is there design? Listen to where all this design that I just read of came from. Proverbs 3, 19 and 20.
By wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding He set the heavens in place. By His knowledge the deeps were divided, and the clouds let drop the dew. This is the atrocity of pushing God out of the picture. You look at the incredible wisdom that was laid, that made this earth and the heavens what they are, and you say it's nothing. Do you understand? God is legitimate in looking at someone who says that and says, "You don't want me." Forever, you'll understand what that means. You didn't want me. You never gave me the glory. You said it all happened by chance. Are you an airhead? Are you a fool? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Why?
It doesn't take a smart person, a rocket scientist, to be able to look at the design and say it had to come from an intelligent, a wise. How many adjectives did Mark read concerning God's wisdom, God's knowledge, God's understanding? All of it came to be. In fact, listen to Psalm 104:24. Psalm 104:24.
How many are your works, O Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures.
In wisdom you made them all. The issue is not that seeds were scattered. The issue is they were planted purposely, with intention, and God did it himself. I never gave you, which I should, but I think you know Psalm 139:13-18. Psalm 139:13-18 says that God's the one who formed us in the womb. God formed you in the womb. You're not just a biological thing that happened. Yes, He allowed that, but in some way He was involved in your formation, Tanya. He was involved in your formation, Scott. He was involved in your formation, Allie. He was involved in your formation, Julie. He was involved in your formation, Mike. All of that, He was involved. He's the one who created. And the billions of DNA molecules prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. That is why Paul says in Romans 11:33-36, what he says. And we've got to, this is almost memorizations time, here. It's a little difficult to memorize, but listen to Romans 11:33-36. What incredible, Paul just breaks out into an incredible soliloquy of praise on the wisdom of God. Go ahead.
Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable His judgments and His paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been His counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay him? For from Him, and through Him, and to Him are all things. To Him be glory forever. Amen.
For from Him all things came. To Him all things are. What did I miss?
Through Him.
Through Him all things came to be, and to Him all things are. Why? Because He's the intelligent creator behind all the design. And we know Him as Christians even more so. Because hear me on this. How do we as sinners ever get to a holy God? We don't get it. We don't fully. We understand it, and we've given Him our heart, our life, but we don't get the enormity of what God did. In wisdom, He made a way so that we as sinners could be able to get to Him. He had to die, and yet He had to be a man as well. How does that happen? Because if one man died for us, that would just be good for the man. It wouldn't do us any good. But how can God die? In the union of those two natures, Jesus Christ showed the incredible wisdom of God, that He would suffer and die there on a cross, so that as deity He would pay for the sins of the world, and yet as humanity He would be a true sacrifice on our behalf. Let me tell you, try to figure that one out. That's the wisdom of God, the wisdom of holy God. Every other religion doesn't have. That's why I'll go back to the God of the Bible, because no other religion deals with the sinfulness of our heart, the inherent sinfulness of our heart. You can pretend you're better than you are, but when push comes to shove, just as sure as I see the sunburn in the mirror as I look, I still see a sinful man looking at me. Can't get around it, but I see a sinful man saved, forgiven in Jesus. And it wasn't my wisdom that figured it out. It wasn't me, as with so many other religions out there. You trying your best to be good for God. Be your best for God. Give yourself for Him. Even get blown up for His glory on that. The trouble is, you die with a sinful heart. It doesn't do anything on that. If anyone is in Christ, He is a new creation. The old has gone, the new has come. Only Christianity. And that's what this table speaks of. I want to talk about the wisdom of God. I want to talk, I can talk so easily, I know, on a lot of things. I know you say, but I can talk so easily on the fact that God's there. God is there. You can't convince me. That's the thing that sometimes stabilizes me. Sometimes I struggle with depression myself. I could never shove God out of the picture. I can't. And sometimes that's frustrating in my head as well. Because I know that I know that I know, and I keep going, that I know, He's there. There's no doubt. How do you explain everything? I'm not going to be a fool. I'm not going to be an airhead and say it all happened by chance. Because every day I walk into that garden of mine and I see a design that has happened in that. Every time I look in the mirror, I see a design in me that says, the Creator must have put me together on that. And a Creator saved me in and through the shed blood of Jesus. If you've never given your heart and life, or you've been lax, just before we go to the table, bow your head before Him and just say, I acknowledge you. I acknowledge you as sovereign Lord again. I just want you to know it. I believe firmly that you're there. I believe it with all my heart. The design around me proves it. The fact I see in that. Before we go to the table, 30 seconds I want you just to spend, and then guys, I want you to come up. Thank Him that He's there. Acknowledge before Him you're there. And thank you that you've made a way in and through Jesus, whereby my sinful self, in wisdom, could be made right. Thank you.